I just think the fear of the Lord as a kind of concluding statement is the perfect way to close. Oftentimes, as I preach, some passages just end on an anticlimax. Well, this is the opposite. This is a climactic 30th resolution. Fear God. If there is an anticlimax in that, it's the "and the king" part. You know, it's like
you could almost see Solomon writing this: "Fear the Lord and me." So welcome back to Footnotes. I'm Adam Castellino. With me, as always, is our pastor, Dr. Tony Caffey. It's good to see you again, Tony.
You too, Adam.
And we've reached the end of the 30 resolutions from this section of Proverbs.
It only took 3 sermons to get there.
Yeah, so that's 10 a sermon.
I guess it could have been 30 sermons. That probably would have been inefficient.
That would be a lot, almost a year of sermons. But so it was 2 weeks ago, for those who keep in track, Proverbs 24, verses 3 through 22.
Yeah.
So we could jump right in. The first resolution, or the 20th, but the first in this sermon was build your house on wisdom. And you're referencing verses 3 and 4, and you talk about how, Solomon says, by wisdom a house is built. And you made an interesting, in your footnotes, and those who want to read the footnotes to accompany the podcast footnotes, it's on the website, and you have detailed footnotes, your manuscript, and of course footnotes from the resources that you're using for people who want further study. And one of them mentioned a connection to Proverbs 9 about Lady Wisdom building her house. Yeah. And there's this really fascinating correlation. Yeah,
Lady Wisdom obviously calling simpletons in Proverbs 9 to come and to... even she entices these young men with her delicacies and her goodness. And I mean, wouldn't you say, like, overall throughout the book of Proverbs, there's this thread of wisdom's call to us constantly that comes up again and again. Be wise, seek wisdom, build your house on wisdom. And so it's circling back here again in these 30 sayings, but maybe it gets a point of emphasis here in this collection, collection 3. So, I mean, it's important to have that as a framework for your whole life. So I have a young son. I keep thinking about him every time I do this. I try not to mention him every time I'm talking about it because he's actually in the audience, but I just keep thinking, son, there's so many competing things in this world. There's people telling you need to make money and lots of it. You need to have a great education. You need to go after these things. And the call repeatedly in the book of Proverbs is get wisdom, which is derived from the fear of the Lord, which you might say ultimately involves a relationship with the God of the universe. And we know that in the New Testament world is, mediated through the perfect embodiment of wisdom, Jesus Christ. And so I don't see him as, I don't see Lady Wisdom as a, Christ incarnate in the Old Testament, but there is some typology at work there where Jesus is the true embodiment of wisdom, calling us to a life that's built upon him.
Absolutely. And so you made an interesting correlation here, because he's talking, sounds more literal, wisdom and knowledge fills a house with precious and pleasant riches. But you and the commentators you reference in your footnotes say, well, it's more than that. And you talked about, the riches are a family. So someone who might be a little hyper literal, why do we find a correlation between those two things?
Yeah, well, the word home in English and when I say home, I could be talking about the actual brick and mortar of your house, or I could be talking about your family dynamics and your relationship with your wife and your children, but that same kind of thing is at work with Hebrew and the word bayit. So, and I think Solomon is working both sides of that, ultra literally and then also metaphorically, because unlike in our modern day world, you actually did build your house in ancient Israel. You would be the one that would have to work or, conscript some other people to help you with the process of building your house. I didn't build my house, Adam. I don't know about you. Most Americans don't. And so, there's wisdom in terms of tactile, practical wisdom that's necessary to actually build a house and to fill it with, the kinds of things that come from somebody who's gainfully employed, in terms of furniture and clothing and provision for your children. Moving beyond that to the metaphorical realm, you're filling your house, if you're a wise father, you're filling it with peace, you're filling it with joy, you're filling it with care and tenderness and love.
Yeah.
I mean, in reality, who cares if you have a big fancy house that's very well built with, incredible furnishings, if the husband and wife hate each other
Yeah.
and the kids resent their parents and nobody gets along. Like, that's not the ideal that Solomon is driving towards here. What he's advocating for both is a well-built house that's accompanied by being gainfully employed, with also the benefits of a strong, healthy family, a wise family. And these are things that we should go after.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot to go through. I don't know if we're going to reach it all, but the next resolution is leverage the power of wise counsel. And that's verses 3 and on. It says, a wise man is full of strength. That's so awesome. It's just a clear statement, but so profound. And you explored that, and you had a quote where it says, every wise person is strong, which is so amazing and you explored the contrast of the guys who are tough and big and exercise, but they lack the kind of strength they truly need. Mm-hmm. And the passage talks about us seeking wise counsel, as you said, from people. But
I think I may have offended our elders because I said something like my elders are way older than me or something like that. Exactly. And so I need to probably qualify that a little bit. They're not like 50 years older than me, but they are older than me. And that's good. Yeah. I think, if I was in your shoes or in other people's shoes at church, I would want a pastor who has other older, at least, people around the same age. I don't know if John MacArthur has any elders older than him, but I mean, at least similar age group who can inform and counsel. Maybe in terms of new material, I did add to this the wisdom that comes from younger people. And maybe that doesn't get the kind of press that being informed from older people does. But I have found experientially in my own life that there's wisdom that does come from younger people who are less, let's say, cynical about the world, who have less scar tissue built up in their souls and in their bodies. And there is a wisdom that comes from that as you interact with people of different age groups, different demographic groups as well. I mean, if everybody that you hang out with all the time always looks like you, that's not great. Yeah. It's good to have, demographical diversity, age diversity, ethnic diversity, socioeconomic diversity in terms of your counselors and the people that you interact with. There's probably a limit to that because, the person who has 1,000 friends has no friends, but the person who has 30 to 50 solid relationships is going to be better served than the person that has 2 or 3.
Yeah. So this is a good jumping off point. So let's say there's someone listening who's like, well, I don't have a lot of those people. What steps can they take to start developing those relationships? 30 and 50, maybe to a kid, that seems like a lot because he only has a few friends. Some of our more senior members of the church probably have that many people that they've built relationships with. So if someone's stuck in the middle, how can they go about doing that?
I love this question. And the first thing I'm going to say is get to church because that's the place where some of that relational capital is going to be built. Yep. And I mean, in what other institution are you going to be in a location once a week, worshiping the God of the universe, rubbing shoulders with people who are like-minded in that way? And even in the football season, you only have 8 home games, and how spiritually minded is that? I guess work would be the other thing that compares because we're there 40 hours a week, but you don't have the same opportunities you do at church. So get to church. Let me add to that this though: if you are at church and you are going to church, cultivate the power of hospitality. I think that's a lost art in American culture. Invite people into your homes. Go to their homes. Don't go uninvited, but say, hey, I'd like to drop by or come by sometime. Yeah. And get invested in each other's life. We've talked about small groups and how powerful they are, and you've experienced that, Adam, so have I. But, in addition to that, there are some really practical ways that within the life of the church, with using the gift, whether you have the gift of hospitality or not, just be hospitable one to another in order to build relationships and look to invite people over to your home that are from those different demographical categories. So if you're an older person, invite a younger person. If you're a younger person, invite an older person and vary the kinds of people that you're interacting with. And I'll say one more thing. So this was a wide open question, so thank you for it. Start serving at church as well. There's something about when you lock arms and service with one another as you do those things on the worship team or in children's ministry or serving, in our connection team or in coffee, where just the act of serving alongside of someone, you get to know them and you start to build that relational capital. And then all of a sudden you pick their brain for ideas and you have now a growing multitude of counselors.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer because there's so many times where when you're doing that, what counsel's given without even realizing it. And that seems to happen more because there are times where it's appropriate to sit down with your pastor and seek wise counsel or through biblical counseling, et cetera. But those are probably limited because it's more focused and you don't always have the opportunity. But when you're serving alongside someone on the worship team or having a small group or just having coffee and you're building those relationships, it's like there's almost like a 24/7 kind of road of wisdom being shared. Like, I didn't sit down for counsel, but I'm talking to you about your day and something comes up and now I'm learning something. And those opportunities are always there when you make yourself available like that. It's really cool.
Yeah, I typically, and now I'm a pastor, so this is not something to compare with, but I typically 3-4 times a week have a lunch or a coffee appointment with folks just to get to know people better. And we always do that thing at church, not every week, but pretty frequently, where it's like turn to your neighbor and greet them. And I can just see on people's faces, all the extroverts are like, yeah. And all the introverts are like, I hate this part of the service. And so we're going to keep doing that because I think it projects friendliness, and it, especially for visitors, it gives an opportunity for them to introduce themselves to new people. But it's gotta be more than that. If that's the only interaction you have with people at church, like that's a fail. Get invested in other people's life. And maybe it's that person that you turn and shake hands with who at the end of the service, you're like, hey, I'd like to get to know you better. Let's have lunch sometime. Yeah. Maybe now, maybe sometime this week, invite them over to your house and really embrace these ways that we as a church, we have such an advantage over the rest of the world. Yeah. We come together once a week on Sunday to worship, and it's like a missed opportunity if we just come and then leave and then don't have anything beyond that. That's a missed opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah, those little turn to your neighbor moments could be the start of a friendship. So you say hello to them, and then, like you said, go out to get coffee, lunch, whatever, and who knows how God can use it. So as we keep moving, almost the flip side of that is the next verse or the next passage where it warns about the fool who does not open his mouth at the gate. And you said, if you're going to say something, make it worth saying. And so, of course, a great challenge for us. And the New Testament talks about this. Paul's like, let no unwholesome words come out of your mouth, only things that benefit. But my question is, sometimes the fool does open his mouth. So what should we do in those moments, whether it's us or someone else? How do we handle that?
There's actually a way to translate this differently, and the Hebrew could go either way. But there's the possibility here that a fool should not open his mouth versus doesn't open his mouth. And I mean, either way, what we're talking about is the reality that a fool has nothing worth saying, even though sometimes they're quite garrulous in the way they interact with people. And so he doesn't or he shouldn't. And what we would call, the perlocutionary force of this text is not just shut up. The force of this is be wise and bone up on the fear of the Lord and the truths of Scripture, so that when you do talk, you have things that are worth hearing and receiving. That's the force of this text. So it's not just a don't talk. It's a make your talk meaningful. And I know, even with the turn to your neighbor moments, like there are moments when small talk is inevitable. Where, you've got to make comments about the weather or comments about the Spurs here in San Antonio or about politics if you are brave enough to broach that subject. But, it needs to be quickly, it needs to quickly move beyond that if you're really going to be building relational capital and have something more valuable than just that. So I mean, that's the emphasis here. Get wise. Again, it's like build your house, your relational house with other people on the truth of wisdom so that when you do have something to say, it's worth saying.
Yeah. Seems like Proverbs cares a lot about wisdom. Like it keeps
I get that impression.
Back. It's like, what's going on?
Yeah. Not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I picked that up reading the book.
I think we should get wisdom. So the next resolution, you were warning about schemers as a drain on society. And it's pretty obvious. You listed some very infamous people who were drains on society, famous people who did terrible things. And then you even mentioned there's 1,000 more who do this stuff, but we don't know about them. And a very strong warning. One little note I wanted to talk about, and you've talked about this during the sermons, but I just want to revisit it. It's a word that pops up a lot in Proverbs and in other places, this term called scoffer. And when we think about schemers, we think about people who are overtly doing something evil. But a scoffer, at least as I understand, is someone saying nasty stuff. But it says a scoffer is an abomination. It's almost like it's putting it on the same level as someone plotting a crime. So why is the Bible, why is Proverbs, and even Peter talks about scoffers, and why is that such a warning to us?
Yeah, there's three categories of fool in Proverbs. There's the simpleton, the petit, who really is kind of on the fence, and so he could go one way or the other. But just because he's gullible and he's young, he's impressionable. Oftentimes he leans towards folly. So there's hope for the petit. Yeah. Then there's the casil, who is like the fool, maybe an older person, maybe somebody who is not on the fence, but he's all in on foolishness and he's following the wrong crowd. And he, at least at some point there's hope even for him as wisdom's calling out to him and saying, stop being a fool, come to the side of wisdom. Then there's the third category, which is like, the seared conscience kind of, I'm a fool and I'm proud of how much I am a fool, and I'm going to mock and I'm going to scoff and I'm going to deride the world and Christianity, or in this case, the fear of the Lord and the ethos of Israelite culture. Yeah. So that's the person who, even it says in Proverbs, to punish and even beat the scoffer, not for the scoffer's sake, because he's not going to learn anything, but for the sake of the petit and the casil, the other two individuals who maybe they'll see that and it'll be a deterrent for their own behavior. So similarly here, so we have those terms, the schemer and the scoffer, put together here as one person. Yeah. This is a person that is so derelict in terms of their behavior that they're turning their back on society. They're admittedly a drain on society, and they just don't care. They're just looking out for themselves. And so that's the kind of the picture of scoffer from start to finish in the book of Proverbs. And it's always the most extreme presentation of the fool.
Yeah, that's fascinating and very helpful. And when you think about that in terms of just original sin and how we're all fallen, it might be tempting to think everyone is in this just one camp of sinners, and we're all born into sin. We all need Christ. But this whole exploration of those three progressions, it's like there are people who are further gone in their sin, and it's kind of scary, but also a good warning, like I said, for the petit and I forget the other one.
Casil.
The petit and casil. Like, there are people who are sinners and need Christ, but aren't as far gone as they might if they don't learn and repent and receive wisdom now. And so to me, it almost seems like scoffing is like the mask this person wears. Like, it's the evidence of what's going on in their heart, which, Christ said, from abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So it's
interesting to me, the analogy that I've used in the past for the scoffer, the Hebrews relates for the person who's the most extreme in terms of a fool. I've always attributed to like the Seinfeld show that I grew up on as a kid, because those guys were scoffers. They mocked everything. They
Yeah.
mocked the world. They mocked marriage. They mocked sexuality. They mocked abortion. Nobody ever plays that episode, but they just mocked everything. It's interesting now as you follow Jerry Seinfeld's life and his career as he's kind of stepped out of the public and now come back, and he's actually advocating in some cases for Israel and for moral causes. And it's like, wow, this guy grew a conscience in the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And yet I'm frustrated by it a little bit, although I tend to agree with him, some of the stuff that he's been saying lately, because we're reaping the whirlwind of what you helped create with your TV show
in our culture.
30 years ago. People are just taking that to the logical extension of what you might call nihilism.
Yeah.
Just mock everything, make jokes of everything. And then now you want to be serious after doing all of that. Well, I mean, we're basically the product, the society is of the kinds of things that him and other peoples were advocating for years ago. So maybe that's a tangent. Maybe I'm being too hard on Jerry Seinfeld, but this is the nature of mocking, being a mocker, being a scoffer. You just turn your back on everything that God has to say and everything that is true and good and beautiful in the world.
Yeah. And there seems to be a little bit of a correlation between that and our next resolution about resilience and strength, because as someone can progress into greater foolishness, there's a hope that you could gain strength if you follow that path of wisdom.
Yeah.
And you had said, strength is a matter of resilience, enduring. That's my comment on that.
Yep. No, that's a helpful point there, and not as frequent, I guess, an idea that comes through in Proverbs, the idea of resilience and working through the struggles of life. That's something that you would read more in Paul or in the New Testament. But I mean, the germ of that is still found in the Old Testament, and we need tough-minded, resilient Christians. Solomon saw that as a need in Israel, and even the idea that shows up later, 7 times the good man falls down and he gets up again. Well, there's something built into the nature of what it means to have character and a moral compass and strength can you press on through the challenges of life? I was even listening to a few guys in a podcast yesterday, and they're like, we're pushing 50, all of us right now, and the reality is that life is hard. The older I get, the more I realize life is hard, and you take shots and your body falls apart. And you, as a Christian, as a God-fearer, you need that resilience, and you need that help against the nihilism that's spreading throughout our world. You need that hope even beyond this world, that there's a future and an eternity, and that's built into some of the framework here in the Book of Proverbs.
And that certainly gives you resilience in terms of the darkness of the world, because Solomon goes on to say, rescue those who are being taken away to death. And this is a very powerful warning here. It says, don't pretend, I didn't know, because God is watching, and you can't lie to God. You can't hide it. And it says, he will not repay men according to their works. And you had said, don't ignore those in mortal danger. And you referenced a few things like
what came to mind when you read that? Did you think World War II, Germany, and people who knew the concentration camps were happening and did nothing?
That's definitely something that comes to mind, because that's a pretty stark one. I mean, we even see it in our world today. And my question would be, as Christians, we definitely see, especially in our society, these evil things happening. You could look at abortion. You could look at things being, children being subjected to very evil things. And there is a movement or attempts in some states and some places to push back on that, in some cases successfully, but it's still an ongoing battle. But it's just so mired in politics. But we know right is right and wrong is wrong, irrespective of the political quagmire. So how do Christians say, I don't care about your politics? Because everyone diverts to politics and they go, oh, you support this person, that person. It's not about that. It's about saving lives. It's about upholding biblical truth. So how can a Christian, if they're having a conversation with someone saying, I don't stand for this, for it not to devolve into just a political argument, but something that can actually be beneficial?
Yeah, so that we have limited power. I think we need to acknowledge that. And even within that statement, there's the assumption that there's the power to do something different. And so I don't have the power in and of myself to stop human trafficking.
Right.
But I can at least speak out against it where I see it, or if there's a way in which it intersects in my life, I can do something. I think that was the power of the movie that came out this last year. Was it The Sound of Freedom?
Yep.
How, one FBI agent, was he FBI or was he?
Might be one of those organizations, DEA or
He was able to actually enact changes. So good for him. We need more Christians like that in powerful places like that. But I think at bare minimum, I would say this: don't believe lies and don't affirm lies. Tell the truth. Yeah. So, there's abortion is probably the big one that we'll talk about, and we've got issues in the Middle East. We've got good actors, bad actors, and at least don't affirm lies when people are advocating for them. That's the bare minimum of what we can do as Christians, and say, no, life begins at conception. Abortion is not okay, even if he's a candidate that I like 99% of the time, but that 1% he's got against him. At least be honest with the fact that, okay, that's not right, and let's advocate for change where we can with candidates like that. I think the big lost cause in American politics right now is, gay marriage. Since when was Obergefell? 2015. You just feel like the whole world is against us as Christians in terms of advocating for gay marriage. There's very little that you and I are going to be able to do in terms of to change that, but at the same time, we don't affirm the falsehood of marriage is the same in a homosexual union as it is a heterosexual union. It's not. And we speak the truth. We believe the truth. We go to churches where that truth is advocated as it comes up in Scripture. That's another thing that we can do, even though you're right, we're limited in terms of what we're able to do to really enact change in our world.
The next one, you're talking about the sweetness of wisdom, and Solomon compares it to honey on the comb, and then it connects to know that wisdom is such to your soul. So it's like honey, wisdom is sweet to your soul. And he says something that is, like we've said before, there's these glimmers of eternity. He says those who embrace wisdom, there will be a future, and their hope will not be cut off.
Yep. Another one of those passages that give you just a taste of what he might be thinking in terms of something we would call the afterlife.
Yeah.
And so, there's all this argumentation, even by scholars, even reputable scholars, that say Solomon didn't have any vision of the afterlife at all. And there's even some Jewish scholars in terms of their understanding of Hebrew that would advocate for that. And I see it the other way. I see these little pictures, these little glimpses of afterlife talk among Solomon's words here. So, I think that's right. And even if that wasn't there, even if it was, so oblique, it's not even worth noting. I mean, the Proverbs is not the only book in the Bible, so we know that we have that hope in other parts of the New Testament and the Old Testament. So wisdom is something that we taste and get a sense of and long for, and it gives us a sense, I would say, as part of us being image bearers made in the image of God, we get a taste of something beyond the lacking wisdom of our world and say, I want more of that. And wouldn't you know it, a wise God has a wise plan that allows us to enter into his wise provision for us for eternity. And we'll be wiser than our wisest person on earth in the second part of our lives when we enter into the presence of the Lord.
Yeah, that's right. So we're running out of time. What final thoughts do you have for these 30 resolutions?
I just think the fear of the Lord as a kind of concluding statement is the perfect way to close. So I oftentimes as I preach, I've even heard you say this, some passages just end on an anticlimax and you try to struggle with it like, okay, how does that sync up with everything that's being said here? Well, this is the opposite. This is a climactic 30th resolution. Fear God. There is an anticlimax in that. It's the and the king part. It's like Yes, I'm all for fearing the Lord.
Yeah.
That's the substance of our wisdom. We love Yahweh. We love the fact that, Jesus said, I am, in the New Testament in John 8:58. So he's Yahweh in the flesh came to die for our sins. I fear Yahweh. Oh, but and the king, ooh, I don't like that part. That's the part that's a little tricky for us, especially us rebel Americans that we are. So there's something worth chewing on and thinking through.
Yeah.
And even when we do have to embrace civil disobedience, which we do, Adam, we do. You're probably right about that from time to time. That should be, that's not an ace in your hand that you want to play over and over again. You want to be careful when you use that and consider, okay, is this civil disobedience necessary? Is it really something that's conflicting with what the Lord says, or do I just have this hankering to rebel against the government? Because I'm an American or because I'm a Texan. We need to think that through and take passages like this serious. Fear the Lord, yes, and also the king, the political and governing authorities that God has put over us.
You could almost see Solomon writing this, fear the Lord and me. But it's true. It's absolutely true. Well, thank you, Tony, once again for being with us. Thank you for watching. Be sure to check out our channel for all the rest of our content as well as the sermon. See you next time.